A wealthy millionaire marries his newly hired, plain-looking maid on a reckless bet, only to uncover a shocking truth on their wedding night. The Montero mansion was alive with the hum of laughter, the clinking of crystal glasses, and the murmurs of the privileged elite. Leonard Montero, the evening's host, stood at the center of it all, his presence commanding attention as always. Surrounded by affluent guests, he basked in the admiration of those who fed his ego with every word. Then, as if drawn by the scent of arrogance, Edward Serrano approached, his ever-mischievous smirk in place, a glass of wine lazily swirling in his hand. Known for his sharp tongue and love of provocation, Edward fixed his gaze on Leonard with calculated amusement. "Leonard," he drawled, his voice laced with mischief, "you're always preaching that money can buy anything, that it has the power to shape and transform the world at will." Leonard arched a bored eyebrow. "Am I wrong? Wealth is the ultimate force. With it, nothing is beyond reach." Edward tilted his head as if entertaining a great philosophical dilemma. Easy to claim when you're surrounded by people too afraid to challenge you. But what if I dared you to prove it? A hush fell over the group. The air shifted, thick with intrigue. Leonard set his glass down and crossed his arms, his stance unwavering. And what, exactly, would this proof entail? Edward stepped closer, his grin widening like a man savoring a game he knew he would win. "A wager," he declared. $5 million says you can't marry a woman outside of our world, someone who doesn't fit your ridiculous standards of beauty, wealth, or status. And here's the real challenge. You must stay married to her for 3 months. Convince the world it's real. Transform her into someone entirely new. A ripple of amused murmurs spread through the room. The challenge was absurd, bold, scandalous, and thoroughly entertaining. Eyes darted between the two men, awaiting Leonard's response. Leonard let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "You can't be serious, Edward. Me? Marry a woman who doesn't meet my standards? For 3 months? That's so absurd it doesn't even warrant a response." But Edward was undeterred. His gaze drifted through the room, searching, until it landed on a particular figure. Isabella moved between guests, balancing a silver tray of champagne flutes with practiced precision. Her dark hair was neatly pulled into a modest bun, her black and white uniform crisp and unassuming. There was nothing striking about her. No elegance, no charm, nothing to turn heads. She kept her gaze lowered, her presence blending into the background like an invisible thread in an opulent tapestry. Edward chuckled, nodding in her direction. "What about her, your maid? She's unremarkable, completely outside your type. Perfect for this little experiment." Leonard followed his gaze, and the moment his eyes landed on Isabella, his expression darkened. "You must be joking. Me? Marry a maid? That's beneath even your level of absurdity." "Why not?" Edward pressed, his grin dripping with provocation. "If money truly buys everything, then this should be effortless for you. After all, you're the great Leonard Montero. Or are you?" He tilted his head, feigning curiosity. "Could it be that you're afraid? That you might actually lose this bet?" A charged silence fell over the room. The guests leaned in, their anticipation palpable. Leonard met Edward's gaze, feeling the taunt burrow deep into his pride. Backing down now would be an admission of weakness, something he would never allow. He exhaled slowly, running his tongue over his teeth as he weighed his response. Then, with deliberate ease, he picked up his wine glass, took a measured sip, and let a cold smile creep onto his lips. "Deal?" he said smoothly. 3 months with her, and I'll prove to you that there is no challenge I can't conquer." A murmur rippled through the crowd, punctuated by scattered laughter and intrigued whispers. Edward merely smirked, extending his hand. Leonard grasped it firmly, sealing the wager. "This is going to be entertaining," Edward remarked with a mockingly amused tone. "But remember, you have to make it believable. I expect to see her on your arm at every event, dressed like the perfect high society wife. And if you fail, well, I'll be $5 million richer." Leonard's jaw tightened ever so slightly, his expression sharpening. "I don't fail, Edward," he stated coolly. He released Edward's hand and took a step back, his confidence unshaken. "Start counting your losses." The next morning, the clatter of dishes filled the kitchen as Isabella scrubbed a stubborn stain from a porcelain plate. She was so focused on her task that she barely registered the approaching footsteps. until a shadow fell across the sink. Turning, she found herself face to face with Leonard Montero. He stood in the doorway, hands casually tucked into his pockets, his piercing gaze locked onto her. "Monsieur Montero," she asked, hesitating. "Do you need something?" "Yes, Isabella," he replied, stepping forward with an air of careful deliberation. "I need to talk to you. It's about a proposal." Isabella frowned, wiping her hands on her apron. "A proposal?" Leonard leaned in slightly, his voice measured and precise. He knew he had to frame this the right way. Say too much, and she'd refuse outright. "I want you to marry me." The plate in Isabella's hands slipped from her fingers, crashing into the sink and sending water splashing over the counter. "What?" "You heard me," Leonard said, his tone unnervingly calm, as though he were discussing a business transaction. "It's a contract, a marriage of convenience. 3 months. You'll be my wife, and in return, I'll pay you a sum that could change your life." A breathless laugh escaped Isabella, the absurdity of his words sinking in. "That's not funny, Mr. Montero." "I'm not joking, Isabella." Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a check and set it on the counter. The number scrawled across it made her breath hitch. It was enough to erase every financial worry she had ever known. "For years you've been struggling, haven't you?" Leonard's voice was smooth, almost persuasive. "With this money, you could start over, leave all of that behind. So, what do you say?" Isabella's gaze flickered between the check and the man standing before her. She had no illusions about Leonard Montero. He was a man accustomed to bending the world to his will. To him, she wasn't a person, just a convenient pawn in whatever scheme he was orchestrating. "Why me?" she asked, her voice quieter than she intended. Leonard didn't hesitate. "Because you're perfect for it," he stated matter-of-factly. "No one would ever believe I'd marry someone like you. That's exactly why it will work." His brutal honesty made her stomach twist. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to walk away. But the weight of overdue bills, the endless struggle to support her family, and the suffocating reality of her life kept her frozen in place. "And after 3 months?" she finally asked, gripping the edge of the counter. Leonard shrugged, his indifference cutting deeper than his words. "We get divorced. No questions, no ties. You return to your life and I return to mine. The only difference is, you'll be in a much better place than where you started." Isabella inhaled sharply. She knew agreeing to this would mean sacrificing a part of herself, selling her dignity in exchange for security. But was it really any different from the compromises she had already made just to survive? She swallowed hard, then forced out the words that sealed her fate. "I accept." A satisfied smirk crossed Leonard's lips. "Good. Tomorrow you'll be my wife." As he turned and walked out of the kitchen, Isabella watched him go, her heart sinking like a stone. She was stepping into dangerous territory, playing a game with rules she didn't fully understand. And yet, for the first time in years, she felt the slightest flicker of something unfamiliar. Hope. The next morning, there was an unusual tension in the air at the Montero mansion. The staff whispered in hushed voices as they went about their tasks, exchanging puzzled glances. It wasn't every day their employer lingered at home, let alone dressed so sharply before noon. But for Isabella, the day had begun just like any other, cleaning, organizing, and doing her best to remain unseen. She was in the side garden, kneeling as she gathered fallen leaves from beneath an old oak tree. The earthy scent of damp grass mixed with the soft fragrance of blooming flowers, and for a fleeting moment she felt something close to peace. Then a shadow fell over her. "Isabella!" She stiffened at the sound of his voice. Slowly she rose to her feet, wiping her hands on the edge of her uniform, only to realize too late that she had smeared dirt across her apron. Leonard stood before her, his expression unreadable, but there was something in his gaze. Something firm, unwavering. Determination, expectation. "Mr. Montero?" she greeted, trying to mask the unease curling in her stomach. "Everything's ready." His tone left no room for argument. "We're going to the registry office in an hour." Isabella's fingers clenched the fabric of her apron as reality set in. There was no turning back now. She had made her choice. And in 1 hour, she would become Isabella Montero. Isabella blinked, momentarily stunned. "Registry office? Already?" "Yes, the sooner we start, the better." Leonard's voice was cool and detached, his hands slipping into his pockets with the ease of a man used to having his way. "The documents are ready. All you have to do is sign." Her heart pounded. Up until this moment, the entire arrangement had felt like an absurd proposition. Something distant, almost unreal. But now, with the reality of marriage looming over her, it struck with full force. I need more time," she said hesitantly. Leonard tilted his head, studying her with an unreadable expression. "Time for what? You already agreed, Isabella, and I don't like waiting." Every instinct screamed at her to step back, to refuse, to reclaim control over her life. But then she thought of home, of peeling walls and empty cupboards, of her younger siblings' exhausted faces, of overdue bills piling higher than hope itself. A quiet, resigned sigh, she nodded. "All right," she murmured. "I'm ready." An hour later, Isabella sat stiffly in the back seat of Leonard's limousine, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The plush leather seats and tinted windows only made her feel more suffocated. Across from her, Leonard was completely absorbed in his phone, typing away, his expression indifferent. Outside, the city blurred past. Towering glass buildings, luxury storefronts, and impeccably dressed people who moved with effortless confidence, never sparing a glance at the world around them. To Isabella, this place felt like another universe, one where she didn't belong. Leonard finally put his phone away and glanced at her. "We're here." The limousine pulled up in front of a discreet yet stately building, its sleek facade radiating quiet power. Isabella hesitated before stepping out, feeling Leonard's gaze on her as he held the door open. Inside the registry office, everything was already in motion. 2 lawyers waited beside a polished wooden desk, and a small team of staff stood nearby, their expressions carefully neutral, clearly instructed not to ask questions. Isabella's stomach twisted as she reached for the pen. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she forced herself to steady her grip. Just a signature, she told herself. Just ink on paper. Moments later, it was done. She was Isabella Montero. Leonard shook the registrar's hand before turning to her with a light, almost amused smile. "Congratulations. We're officially husband and wife now." Isabella swallowed, keeping her eyes on the papers. "It doesn't feel like it," she murmured under her breath. Leonard didn't respond. He simply guided her back to the car, where the silence between them stretched heavier than before. Returning to the mansion. As soon as they stepped through the grand entrance, Isabella noticed the difference. The heavy, dark curtains had been replaced with elegant drapes that softened the harsh daylight. The chandeliers cast a warmer, more inviting glow. A new arrangement of art and decor subtly altered the energy of the space, making it feel staged. Like a set, prepared for a grand performance. Leonard walked ahead, removing his jacket with effortless ease, seemingly unfazed. But Isabella felt it. The shift, the unspoken expectation that lingered in the air. This wasn't just a marriage of convenience, it was a spectacle. And she was the leading actress in a role she hadn't prepared for. Leonard led her up the grand staircase in silence, his footsteps measured, controlled. Stopping in front of a set of heavy double doors, he pushed them open, revealing a bedroom so extravagant it felt surreal. A massive bed sat at the center, draped in the finest velvet. The curtains were thick, the kind that blocked out the world. Across the room, a walk-in closet loomed, larger than the house Isabella had lived in her entire life. "This will be your room," Leonard announced, his tone as indifferent as if he were assigning a hotel suite. Isabella hesitated before stepping inside, her fingers grazing the edge of a gilded dresser. Everything in the room exuded luxury, but rather than feeling impressed, she felt out of place. "You don't belong here," the walls seemed to whisper. "It's beautiful," she murmured, unsure of what else to say. "I hope you're satisfied." Leonard's voice was clipped, businesslike. "And remember, you're my wife now. It's important that everyone believes it, especially the people in my circle." Isabella turned to face him, folding her arms. "And what exactly do you expect from me, Mr. Montero?" Leonard arched an eyebrow, caught off guard by her defiance. He was used to unquestioning obedience, but Isabella wasn't making this easy. "I expect you to play the part," he said smoothly. "Elegant dresses, poise, no reckless behavior." Isabella let out a short, humorless laugh. "Oh, of course, because that's all that matters to you, appearances." Leonard's jaw tensed, but he didn't respond. He wouldn't admit she was right, even if he knew she was. "You'll have everything you need," he continued coolly. "Tomorrow morning, a stylist will arrive to help you select appropriate attire." Isabella exhaled sharply, the weight of her situation pressing down on her. She wanted to argue, to resist, but she was already trapped. "Fine," she said at last. "If that's what you want, I'll do my part, but don't expect me to change who I am." Leonard shrugged, his expression unreadable. "That's not my concern, Isabella. As long as you uphold your end of the deal, I don't care who you are." With that, he turned and left, his footsteps fading down the hallway. Alone in the cavernous room, Isabella lowered herself onto the edge of the bed. The mattress was impossibly soft, but she felt no comfort. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. 3 months, she whispered to herself. Just 3 months. Downstairs. Leonard descended the staircase with calculated steps, his mind already shifting to the next phase of the bet. He should have felt triumphant. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned, and yet, something about Isabella unsettled him. She wasn't like the others. She didn't cower, didn't simper or seek his approval. There was something in her eyes, a quiet defiance, a resilience that irritated him. This was supposed to be simple, a transaction. But for the first time, Leonard had the unsettling feeling that he had underestimated his opponent. The game had begun, and neither of them was prepared for what was coming. The next morning, a soft knock at the door pulled Isabella from restless sleep. Before she could respond, the door swung open and an elegant woman strode inside. Dressed in a flawlessly tailored suit, she carried an air of quiet authority. Behind her, 2 assistants followed, wheeling in a rack brimming with luxurious gowns in rich silks and delicate lace. "Good morning, Mrs. Montero," the woman greeted with a polished smile. "Victoria, your husband has hired me to ensure you dress appropriately for the upcoming events." Isabella, still perched on the bed, blinked at her in confusion. "Upcoming events?" Victoria nodded, her movements precise as she arranged the dresses across the room. "Yes. Mr. Montero believes appearance is crucial, especially for someone in your position. That's why he ordered a complete wardrobe for you." Isabella scoffed softly, slowly rising from the bed. "Is this really necessary?" Victoria, unbothered by the question, paused and met Isabella's gaze directly. "With all due respect, ma'am, necessary or not, it's what he wants. I suggest you make the most of it." Isabella wanted to argue, to push back against the ridiculousness of it all, but what was the point? Practicality won over pride. "Fine, let's just get this over with." Victoria's lips curled into a satisfied smile. Excellent choice. Hours later. For what felt like an eternity, Isabella was measured, fitted, and styled as if she were nothing more than a mannequin. The assistants debated fabrics and silhouettes around her, treating her like an object rather than a person. Despite the discomfort, she couldn't ignore the sheer luxury of the gowns. Rich silks, intricate lace, and delicate embroidery that probably cost more than a year of her salary. But no matter how expensive the clothing, it couldn't erase the truth. No outfit could ever make her belong in this world. When she finally descended the grand staircase, Leonard was waiting in the main hall, seated in a leather armchair, effortlessly composed. He glanced up from his tablet, his sharp gaze assessing her in silence. Not bad. His indifference grated on her nerves more than any insult could. Isabella folded her arms. "Thanks, I guess." Leonard rose smoothly, adjusting his tie with his usual air of control. "We have an event tonight, a dinner with some of my friends. It's important that you're prepared." Isabella narrowed her eyes. "A dinner? And when exactly were you planning to tell me about this?" Leonard blinked, his expression unreadable. "Now." She exhaled sharply, irritated by his arrogance. "Fine, but don't expect me to pretend to be someone I'm not." A hint of a smirk flickered across Leonard's lips. "As long as you don't embarrass me, that's all that matters." The dinner. The restaurant was nothing short of opulent. Glittering chandeliers, walls lined with rare artwork, and a clientele that exuded wealth and exclusivity. It was the kind of place where only the elite were welcome, and tonight, Isabella had been thrust into their world. As they entered, heads turned. Whispers rippled through the room. Leonard walked with effortless confidence, his presence commanding attention. Isabella, in contrast, followed beside him, forcing herself to ignore the curious stares and silent judgments. At their reserved table, Edward was already waiting, lounging in his chair with the satisfaction of a man about to be entertained. Two other men, both part of the original bet, sat beside him, their expressions unreadable. As Isabella took her seat, Edward leaned forward, a slow, mocking smile stretching across his face. "So, this is the famous Mrs. Montero," he mused, amusement dripping from every word. Isabella felt heat rise to her face, but she refused to give him the reaction he wanted. Instead, she met his gaze head-on. That's me," Edward chuckled, swirling his wine. "I have to admit, Leonard, you've truly outdone yourself this time." Leonard's jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with a warning, but he said nothing. He knew better than to take the bait. Because in this world, silence was often the most powerful response. But Isabella had no intention of letting Edward's mockery slide. "And you, Edward?" she asked, tilting her head slightly, her tone deceptively sweet. "Do you always spend this much time dissecting other people's lives, or is tonight a special occasion?" The table fell into a stunned silence. Edward, caught mid-sip, choked on his wine. A few discreet chuckles escaped from the other guests. Even Leonard looked momentarily taken aback, his sharp gaze flickering toward Isabella. She met his eyes for a brief moment. He didn't interfere, nor did he scold her. Instead, there was something in his expression, an unspoken acknowledgement of her defiance, of her refusal to be trampled under the weight of their judgment. Strength. She wasn't afraid of them. The rest of the dinner continued with polished small talk and surface-level conversations, but Isabella could feel it. Every glance, every pause in the conversation was laced with quiet scrutiny. They were dissecting her, waiting for a misstep. She refused to give them one. The car ride home. As soon as the restaurant's golden glow faded behind them and the car doors shut, Isabella let out a quiet sigh of relief. "That was interesting," she muttered, watching the city blur past the window. Leonard, who had been sitting in comfortable silence, leaned forward slightly, his gaze settling on her. "You handled it well." Isabella turned her head toward him, caught off guard by the unexpected praise. "Thanks, I guess." Leonard didn't say anything else, but there was something almost amused in the curve of his lips. A half smile, barely there but impossible to miss. She had surprised him. And Leonard Montero was not a man who was easily surprised. The days that followed, Isabella slowly adjusted to life in the Montero mansion. Though she still felt out of place, she was no longer met with outright suspicion. The staff, who had once observed her with wary glances, began to respect her. Not because of her title, but because of her quiet humility and the way she treated them with kindness. While Leonard watched from a distance, he had expected her to be overwhelmed, to stumble under the weight of expectations. Instead, she adapted, not by changing herself, but by making the space around her bend to her presence. She was a puzzle, and Leonard despised puzzles he couldn't solve. A late-night encounter. It was nearing midnight when Leonard sat in his study, papers spread haphazardly across his desk, the glow of a single lamp illuminating the dark room. He was lost in figures and contracts, his mind working in calculated precision. Then, the soft sound of footsteps. He glanced up just as Isabella appeared in the doorway, a cup in her hands. She didn't hesitate, didn't knock or wait for permission. She simply walked in, as if the mansion belonged to her just as much as it did to him. "You look like you need a break," she remarked, setting the cup down on his desk. Leonard arched an eyebrow, more amused than annoyed. "And you think you can tell me what to do?" Isabella shrugged, unbothered by his sharpness. "It doesn't hurt to try." For a moment, he simply stared at her. She was unlike anyone he had ever met. Unapologetically direct, yet oddly gentle. He picked up the cup, inhaling the fresh herbal scent before taking a small sip. "Thanks," he said after a pause. The word felt unfamiliar on his tongue. Isabella slid into the chair across from him, her gaze flickering over the scattered documents. "You work a lot." Leonard leaned back in his chair. "Someone has to." She smiled lightly. "Even so, you should rest sometimes." Leonard studied her, intrigued. There was something about her presence, something unpolished, yet oddly grounding. She didn't belong in his world, and yet she seemed entirely unfazed by it. She unsettled him. And worse, he wasn't sure if he liked it or not. outthinking the words left his mouth. "You're different." Isabella tilted her head, curiosity flickering in her eyes. Different how? Leonard didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure if he even knew the answer himself. But one thing was certain. For the first time in a long while, something was shifting. "I don't know." Leonard shook his head as if trying to dismiss a thought he didn't fully understand. "Just different." Isabella chuckled softly, the sound light but knowing. "I'll take that as a compliment then." She rose to leave, pausing at the door for a final glance over her shoulder. "Good night, Leonard." Leonard met her gaze, something unreadable flickering in his expression. "Good night, Isabella." As the door clicked shut behind her, he leaned back in his chair, still absently holding the teacup. For the first time in a long while, he felt a quiet sense of peace. He had no idea why. Underscore 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 underscore. The next morning, the backyard garden had been transformed. Under the sprawling branches of an ancient oak tree, a table was meticulously arranged. An elegant display of books, silverware, crystal glasses, and a crisp notepad waiting for use. Standing beside it was Victoria, Isabella's ever-composed stylist, her professional smile firmly in place. But it was the other woman who truly commanded attention. Dressed in a refined navy dress, her silver hair swept into a neat chignon, she radiated an air of quiet authority. Isabella slowed her steps as she approached, her eyes narrowing at the carefully curated scene. Leonard stood nearby, his posture effortlessly composed, his expression unreadable. "Isabella, this is Esser," he said, gesturing to the older woman. "She's an etiquette and manners specialist. Starting today, you'll be training with her daily to ensure you know how to conduct yourself in your new position." Isabella blinked. "Etiquette lessons? Are you serious?" "Completely." Leonard's tone left no room for debate. He crossed his arms, watching her with that signature air of quiet challenge. "You need to know how to navigate the events I attend. We can't afford any mistakes." Isabella let out a disbelieving laugh, shaking her head. "Of course, because nothing in this world is more important than impressing the people you want to impress." "Exactly," Leonard replied smoothly, ignoring the sarcasm. "Let's begin." Isabella knew she had no real choice in the matter, but that didn't mean she had to make it easy for him. With exaggerated grace, she lowered herself into the chair, crossing her arms. "All right then, teach me how to be perfect." Lessons in elegance, the first sessions tested the patience of everyone involved. Esser, with her impeccable posture and unwavering composure, guided Isabella through the subtleties of high society. How to hold a wine glass correctly, which fork to use, how to walk with effortless grace. Isabella, on the other hand, seemed determined to turn it into a game. For every correction, she found a way to push back. Deliberate missteps, exaggerated movements, an amused smirk that made Leonard's jaw tighten from across the garden. Clatter, a fork hit the ground for the third time that morning. Esser let out a slow, measured breath, her patience stretching thin. "Isabella, you need to focus." Isabella gave her a wide-eyed, innocent look. "I'm trying," she said, though the mischievous glint in her eyes suggested otherwise. Out in his spot a few feet away, Leonard watched the exchange in silence, his gaze narrowing slightly. "Isabella," he finally said, his voice calm but firm, "you know this is necessary." Her smirk faltered just slightly as their eyes met. There was something different in the way he said it. Not just authority, but expectation. Isabella had agreed to this deal, but what she hadn't expected was how much she was starting to matter in a game that was supposed to be nothing more than an arrangement. Necessary for whom? For you? Isabella shot back, her eyes flashing with defiance. Because I'm perfectly fine the way I am. Leonard met her glare with equal intensity. It's necessary for both of us, he stated firmly. I don't make bets to lose. Isabella scoffed but picked up the fork again, holding it with deliberate precision. She wasn't doing this for Leonard, not to fit into his world or to meet his expectations. She was doing it to prove that he had no power over who she was. Subtle changes. As the days passed, the etiquette lessons became less of a chore. At first, they had been nothing more than an annoyance, a way for Leonard to exert control. But as Isabella began mastering the basics, something shifted. She wasn't just enduring them anymore. She was owning them. Yet despite the progress, her relationship with Leonard remained charged. Every conversation was a battle of wills, a silent contest to see who would yield first. And neither of them ever did. An evening at the mansion. One evening, during dinner, Isabella could feel Leonard watching her. His gaze was sharp, calculated, waiting, almost daring her to make a mistake. She met his eyes with unwavering confidence. Taking her time, she placed her fork and knife perfectly on the plate, her posture flawless. Then, with a knowing smirk, she spoke. "Are you satisfied?" Leonard leaned back slightly, studying her with quiet amusement. "I'll admit, you're improving." "Well, I'm a dedicated student," Isabella replied, her voice laced with irony. But something was different tonight. For the first time, there was no mocking edge in Leonard's expression, no cold indifference. He was looking at her differently now, seeing beyond the bet, beyond the arrangement, seeing her. She was more than what he had assumed, more resilient, more intelligent, more unpredictable. And that unsettled him. The first test. The next morning, Leonard announced their next move. "Get ready, you're coming with me to a charity brunch." Isabella arched an eyebrow. "A brunch? Your first test in high society," he said, buttoning his cufflinks without looking at her. "Clarice Belmont is hosting. She's a key business partner, and I need you to behave." "Behave?" Isabella echoed. "You make it sound like I'm a child." Leonard smirked. "Prove me wrong, then." Under watchful eyes, dressed in an elegant blue gown, selected, of course, by Victoria, Isabella entered the event at Leonard's side, feeling the weight of every gaze that turned toward her. She could hear the whispers, see the curiosity in their eyes. They weren't expecting her. They were trying to piece together the mystery, how a woman like her had ended up with Leonard Montero. She refused to shrink under their scrutiny. Instead, she held her head high. A woman approached, sophisticated, poised, exuding effortless authority. "Clarice Belmont." "Leonard, darling." Her tone was warm, but her sharp gaze flickered toward Isabella, assessing. "And who is this lovely lady?" Leonard's smile was polite, but forced. "This is my wife, Isabella." A flicker of surprise crossed Clarice's features before she masked it with a practiced smile. "A pleasure to meet you, Isabella." How unexpected. Leonard never mentioned he was married. Isabella returned the smile, understanding the veiled meaning behind the words. "The pleasure is mine." Clarice's curiosity was evident, but she wasn't the only one. Throughout the brunch, Isabella could feel the unspoken questions lingering in the air. The guests weren't just watching her. They were studying her, hoeing for her to slip, pulling for proof that she didn't belong. But instead of feeling intimidated, Isabella let it fuel her. They were going to judge her, she'd make sure she gave them something to talk about. When Clarice asked Isabella for her thoughts on philanthropy, she didn't hesitate. "I think helping others shouldn't be limited to events like this," she said simply. "It's something we can all do in our daily lives, even in small ways." A brief silence followed, stretching across the table like an invisible ripple. The answer was unexpected, genuine, unpolished, and completely different from the rehearsed speeches these gatherings were used to. Leonard, who had been preparing to step in and smooth over any missteps, stopped. His fingers stilled against the stem of his wineglass as he watched her. Clarice tilted her head, intrigued. Then, with a small, amused smile, she raised her glass of champagne. An interesting perspective, she mused. Leonard, it seems your wife has much to teach us all. A murmur of approval passed through the group. Isabella felt a rush of both pride and relief. For the first time, she had held her own in a world that wasn't hers, and she had done it on her own terms. Back at the mansion. As they stepped into the quiet halls of the estate, Leonard stopped abruptly, turning to face her. You were impressive today. Isabella arched an eyebrow. Was that a compliment? A faint smile tugged at the corner of Leonard's lips. Yes. He studied her, something unreadable flickering in his expression. You managed to win people over, even though you're completely different from them. Isabella crossed her arms, amusement dancing in her eyes. Maybe because I'm not trying to be like them. Leonard held her gaze, as if considering her words more deeply than she had intended. Maybe that's what makes them so intrigued by you. Something in his tone made Isabella shift uncomfortably. She looked away. I just did what I thought was right. Leonard nodded slightly. Keep it up, Isabella. And with that, he turned and disappeared up the stairs. Isabella remained standing in the hallway, watching his retreating figure. For the first time, she felt like she was starting to understand him. Beneath the carefully crafted persona, the arrogance, the coldness, there was something else. Something he hid from the world. Needy, even from himself. Hidden layers. As the weeks passed, their forced cohabitation revealed sides of each other they hadn't expected. The teasing between them continued, as did the small power plays and sharp remarks. But beneath it all, there was something shifting. Lorne began noticing things about Isabella that went beyond her defiance and stubbornness. There was something she carried with her, an invisible weight he couldn't quite define. One night, long after the rest of the house had gone quiet, he found her in the mansion's garden. She was sitting alone on a stone bench, bathed in the soft glow of the garden lanterns. In her hands, she held a small notebook, flipping through its pages absent-mindedly, her expression distant. Leonard stepped forward, his voice breaking the silence. It's late. Isabella startled slightly, snapping the notebook shut. I couldn't sleep. Leonard studied her for a moment before nodding. Neither could I. A pause. He took a step closer. What are you reading? Isabella hesitated, fingers tightening around the notebook. It's just something of mine? Her voice was guarded. Leonard caught it immediately. The way she held the notebook, the flicker of emotion in her eyes. Whatever it was, it mattered to her. But he didn't push. Not yet. Still, curiosity stirred in him, and Leonard Montero never left questions unanswered. A lingering thought. The next morning, while Isabella worked in the kitchen, Leonard sat in his office, staring at the reports in front of him. But for once, his mind wasn't focused on numbers or business. Instead, he kept seeing her, sitting alone in the garden, flipping through that notebook with an expression he couldn't quite define. He didn't know why, but the sight of it unsettled him. That small, unassuming book felt like a piece of her that he hadn't yet uncovered, and Leonard Montero was not a man who ignored curiosity. Crossing a line. Shortly after lunch, while Isabella was still busy downstairs, Leonard found himself standing outside her bedroom door. He hesitated. He shouldn't. And yet, after a moment, he reached for the handle and stepped inside. The room was simple, untouched by the extravagance of the mansion around it. On the dresser, beside a vase of wilted flowers, lay the notebook. Leonard's fingers hovered over it before he picked it up, flipping through the pages carefully. What he found caught him off guard. The notebook wasn't just a journal. It was a mixture of sketches and scattered thoughts, pieces of a world he hadn't known existed inside her. Some pages were filled with delicate drawings of landscapes and flowers, while others contained brief lines of text, thoughts that seemed incomplete, yet deeply personal. Then, one page in particular made him pause. A simple but heartfelt sketch, two small children holding hands with a woman. Beneath it, a single line was scrawled in careful handwriting. I promise to protect them no matter the cost. Leonard frowned. What were those children? Isabella had never mentioned having siblings, or children, and yet something about the way she had written those words made it clear they meant everything to her. Dinner conversations. That evening, Leonard barely touched his food. He watched Isabella closely, his mind turning over the image in the notebook, trying to piece together what it meant. Finally, she caught his gaze and sighed, setting her fork down. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Leonard didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked, almost too casually, "Do you have siblings?" The question made her freeze for a fraction of a second. Small, but noticeable. Then, she quickly masked it, her expression unreadable. "Why do you ask?" Leonard leaned back in his chair, keeping his voice neutral. "Just curious." Isabella averted her gaze, her fingers tightening slightly around her napkin. "I have 2 younger brothers." A pause. "They're fine, at least I hope they are." Leonard caught the hesitation in her voice. "You don't talk to them?" She exhaled, placing her fork down more forcefully than necessary. "There's not much to say. It's been years. They live with an aunt in another city." There it was again, that underlying bitterness, the weight of something unspoken. Leonard didn't push. Not yet, but he knew there was more to the story than she was admitting, digging deeper. A few days later, while Isabella was out with Victoria, Leonard made a call. Minutes later, Santiago, his most trusted assistant, stepped into his office. Leonard handed him a small, slightly worn photograph of Isabella. "I need you to find out everything about her." Santiago studied the photo before glancing up. "Anything specific, Mr. Montero?" Leonard hesitated. Just for a second. A pang of guilt surfaced, but he pushed it down. "Family, past, anything she might be hiding?" Santiago nodded, slipping the photo into his pocket. "Understood. I'll report back soon." As the door closed behind him, Leonard exhaled, rubbing his fingers against his temple. He told himself it was just business, just another step in understanding the woman who now bore his name. But deep down, he knew the truth. This was no longer just about the bet. The truth uncovered. The next morning, Leonard sat at his desk, his fingers tightening around the pages of the report Santiago had delivered. It was a full dossier on Isabella. He read in silence, each word settling over him like a weight he hadn't expected to carry. She had grown up in a modest neighborhood, taking on the role of caretaker for her 2 younger brothers from an early age. At 17, tragedy struck. Her parents died in a car accident, leaving her alone to raise them. For years, she had worked tirelessly, balancing 2 jobs to keep them fed, clothed, and safe. But it hadn't been enough. She lost custody. Not because she was unfit, not because she didn't love them, but because she couldn't provide the kind of stability the system demanded. Leonard exhaled, a strange tightness forming in his chest as he imagined her. Just a girl, fighting battles too big for her to win. Alone the documents was an old, slightly faded photograph. Isabella, younger, smiling. A different kind of smile than the one he knew. There was hope in her eyes, arms wrapped tightly around 2 small boys, as if shielding them from the world. He stared at the image for a long moment before setting it down. For the first time, he realized how little he truly knew about the woman he had married. A confrontation in the garden. That night, Leonard found her in the same place, the garden, sitting on the stone bench, lost in thought. This time he approached more slowly, more cautiously. Out of waiting for permission, he sat beside her. "I need to ask you something," he said, his voice quieter than usual. Isabella turned, wary. "What is it now?" Leonard didn't hesitate. "Why have you never mentioned your family?" The question struck like a bolt of lightning. Isabella's posture stiffened, her expression guarded. "I don't see how that's any of your business." "Maybe it's not," he admitted, "but I read about what happened." Her head snapped toward him, her eyes widening. "You read? What did you do?" Leonard sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I needed to know who you really are, Isabella. And now I do." She shot up from the bench, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. "Do you think you can just invade my life like this? My story isn't some game for you to explore." Leonard stood too, though his tone remained calm. "I'm not playing, Isabella. I just wanted to understand why you're so guarded, why you keep pushing people away." "And now I do?" She shook her head, her voice unsteady. "You don't know anything about me." "I know you lost everything," he said, his voice steady. "And yet you never gave up. That's more than I can say for most people I know." Isabella swallowed hard, staring at the ground as if trying to hold herself together. Leonard took a step closer, hesitating before speaking again. I know I can't change what happened. A pause. But I want you to know that at least while you're here, you're not alone. She lifted her gaze to his, startled by the sincerity in his voice. For the first time, Leonard Montero, the man she had pegged as arrogant, selfish, and impossible, looked real, and it terrified her how much she wanted to believe him. "Thank you," Isabella said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. Then, without another word, she turned and walked back into the mansion. Leonard remained where he was, his gaze lifting to the star-strewn sky. For the first time in years, he felt as if he were beginning to understand the true value of the people around him. Not just as players in his carefully controlled world, but as individuals with their own stories, their own struggles. And Isabella? She was unlike anyone he had ever met. A quiet night. The air inside the Montero mansion was colder than usual, the halls quieter. Upstairs, Isabella sat by her bedroom window, staring out at the distant city lights. Though she was surrounded by wealth, she had never felt lonelier. Her conversation with Leonard still lingered in her mind, reopening wounds she thought had long since healed. She reached for the lamp to turn it off when a soft knock at the door. Frowning, she stood up and opened it, only to find Leonard standing there, an unreadable expression on his face. "Sorry to bother you so late," he began, his voice quieter than usual. "But I need to talk." Isabella raised an eyebrow. Leonard Montero never hesitated. Seeing this side of him made her pause. "About what?" he exhaled slowly, as if choosing his words carefully. "About us and this situation." He gestured vaguely, his usual confidence absent. He hesitated, then stepped aside. "Come in." Leonard entered, pacing slightly before turning to face her, arms crossed. "I know I pressured you into this arrangement," he said, his voice lower, more deliberate. "And I know I haven't exactly been kind." Isabella tilted her head, surprised by his humility. "Is this an apology?" Leonard gave a small, crooked smile. "Maybe it is. I'm not very good at this." She studied him, crossing her arms. "Why are you saying this now?" His jaw tightened slightly before he met her gaze. "Because I've realized you deserve more than what I've offered so far." She stayed silent, processing his words. This was the first time Leonard seemed truly vulnerable, not as the untouchable billionaire, but as a man standing in front of her, uncertain and exposed. "I never asked for anything, Leonard," she said softly. "All I did was agree to the terms of your game." "I know," he replied quickly. "But I also know you deserve respect, and that's something I've failed to give you." There was no arrogance in his voice, no calculated charm, just honesty. Something inside Isabella shifted. The resentment she had carried for weeks wavered, not disappearing entirely, but losing some of its weight. She sighed. "Respect is a good start." Leonard nodded, as if relieved. He glanced toward the window, then back at her. "Can I stay here for a while?" She hesitated for only a moment before stepping aside, allowing him to stay. Either of them knew what this meant, what was changing between them. But in the quiet of the night, for the first time it didn't feel like a game anymore. "If you promise not to criticize my simple furniture, I suppose you can stay," Isabella said, a hint of humor in her voice. Leonard let out a genuine smile, one that wasn't calculated, wasn't forced. It was rare, and it caught even him by surprise. As the night wore on, they ended up sitting on the floor, leaning against the bed, a half-empty bottle of wine between them. The conversation flowed effortlessly, an unexpected ease settling between them. For the first time, Leonard spoke about his childhood. He talked about the weight of growing up in a family where expectations were suffocating, where emotions were seen as weaknesses, and where failure was unforgivable. "My mother always said love was a distraction," he murmured, swirling the wine in his glass. She believed relationships were like business deals. You enter them expecting a return. Isabella chuckled softly. "That explains a lot," Leonard smirked, shaking his head. "Don't be so quick to judge me. I know I'm a product of my environment, but sometimes I wonder how things might have been different." Isabella studied him, seeing something beyond the cold, controlled facade he always wore. "You can still change, Leonard. He turned to her, intrigued. You think so? She nodded, her voice steady. I think anyone can change if they want to. Leonard's eyes softened in a way she had never seen before. What about you? What would you change if you could? For a moment, Isabella hesitated, staring into her wineglass as if searching for an answer. Isabella, I wish I'd been stronger in the past, she admitted, her voice quieter now. Maybe my brothers would still be with me if I had fought harder. Leonard frowned, setting his glass down. Isabella, you did everything you could. You can't blame yourself for that. That's easy for you to say, she murmured, looking away. Leonard didn't let the conversation slip away. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his voice firm but gentle. You're the strongest person I know, and if no one's ever told you that before, I'm telling you now. The raw sincerity in his voice caught Isabella off guard. She felt tears welling up, but she refused to let them fall. Instead, she swallowed hard and managed a small, grateful smile. Thank you, Leonard. A subtle shift. In the days that followed, something shifted between them. They still exchanged playful remarks, but now there was a new layer of understanding between them. They trusted each other's presence, and had himself drawn to her presence in a way he hadn't expected, and Isabella, though still wary, began to realize that maybe, just maybe, Leonard Montero wasn't the man she had assumed he was. An unexpected request. One afternoon, Isabella was in the garden, her hands covered in soil as she tended to the flowers. The scent of fresh earth and blooming petals filled the air. Leonard approached, his stance more relaxed than usual. I need your help, he announced. Isabella turned, brushing dirt off her hands. Help with what? Leonard tucked his hands into his pockets. I have an important meeting tonight, and I think it would be good if you came with me. She raised an eyebrow. You want me to attend a business meeting with you? Leonard nodded, his expression unreadable. You're my wife, remember? Isabella let out a short laugh. I thought that was just to fool your friends. Maybe, he admitted, a small knowing smile tugging at his lips. But I think your perspective could be valuable. She paused, narrowing her eyes slightly. Why do I get the feeling you're actually serious? Leonard held her gaze. Because I am. For a moment, Isabella considered refusing, but something in his expression made her stop. This wasn't just about keeping up appearances. He genuinely wanted her there. Funnily, she exhaled. All right, but don't expect me to sit there quietly like some accessory. Leonard smirked. I wouldn't expect anything less from you. A voice at the table. That evening, they arrived at the meeting together, Isabella once again feeling the weight of curious stares, but instead of shrinking under the attention, she lifted her chin, steadied her breath, and walked beside Leonard with confidence. The meeting was well underway when one of the investors, a man who looked as though he'd never once questioned his own authority, began debating the ethical implications of a new project. His tone made it clear that, in his world, profit always came first. And that was when Isabella spoke. With all due respect, she began, her voice even and controlled. I don't think profit and ethics have to be mutually exclusive. It's possible to achieve financial success without compromising the values that truly matter. Silence fell over the room. All eyes turned to her. Leonard, standing beside her, couldn't hide the proud smile that crossed his lips. The meeting's leader, an elderly man dressed in an impeccable suit, studied her thoughtfully before nodding. An interesting perspective, Mrs. Montero. I'd like to hear more. Leonard turned slightly, watching her, not with amusement, not with skepticism, but with something else entirely. Admiration once again. Isabella had done something no one expected, and once again, he found himself drawn to her in a way he couldn't explain. A moment of honesty. Back at the mansion, Isabella collapsed onto the living room sofa, sighing as she kicked off her heels. Leonard entered moments later, hands tucked into his pockets. He watched her for a moment before speaking. You were incredible tonight. Isabella smiled tiredly. Thank you. But Leonard wasn't finished. He took a step closer, his voice quieter now. I'm not just saying that to flatter you, I mean it. You have something special, Isabella. She looked up at him, caught off guard by the raw honesty in his tone. Leonard, what's happening to you? She asked, half teasing, half serious. He chuckled, settling onto the couch beside her, Maybe you're changing me." She gave a small, knowing smile but said nothing. Because deep down, she knew he wasn't wrong. Something was shifting between them, something neither of them had expected. The invitation. The week passed quickly, bringing with it an unexpected invitation, or rather, a command. Leonard decided it was time to introduce Isabella to the most exclusive circle of high society. The annual elite ball. A night of opulence, excess, and power, attended by the country's most influential names. For Leonard, it was just another event. For Isabella, it was nothing short of a nightmare. "Tell me you're joking," she said, arms crossed as she faced him. Leonard's smirk told her everything she needed to know. "I never joke about business, Isabella," she groaned, already regretting saying yes to the last event. Because this time, she wasn't just going as his wife. She was going as the woman who had surprised everyone. And now all eyes would be waiting for her to do it again. When Leonard first mentioned the event, Isabella nearly dropped her coffee cup. "A ball," she repeated, eyebrows shooting up. "What do you mean, a ball?" Leonard remained calm, as if discussing something as mundane as a business meeting. "It's an important event, and now, as my wife, you'll be the center of attention." Isabella exhaled sharply, crossing her arms. "Leonard, I can barely handle formal dinners. Do you really think I'll feel comfortable in a ballroom full of people judging every detail about me?" He shrugged. "You've already proven you can handle difficult situations. It won't be as bad as you think." She narrowed her eyes. "Easy for you to say. You were born into this world. I'm going to be a target in there, and you know it." Leonard sighed, rubbing his temple. "Yes, they'll judge you, but you don't have to care about that. You're not there to please them." "Then why am I going?" she asked, searching his face. Leonard hesitated, then answered simply, "Because it matters to me." Isabella stayed silent. For the first time, Leonard wasn't forcing or demanding. He was asking. That alone made all the difference. After a moment, she exhaled. Right, but if anyone insults me, I'm going to respond." Leonard's lips quirked into a small, knowing smile. "That's all I expect from you." The transformation. On the day of the ball, Victoria and her team arrived early, transforming the mansion into an impromptu atelier. Fabrics, jewelry, and makeup palettes filled the rooms, assistants moving around with quiet efficiency. Isabella stood stiffly as the team adjusted her gown, a long silver masterpiece that shimmered with every movement. She glanced at her reflection, feeling strangely detached from the woman in the mirror. The elegant updo, the flawless makeup, the glittering dress, it was beautiful. But was it her? Victoria, noticing her hesitation, stepped forward and gently took her hands. "You may be wearing something different, but you're still you," she said softly. "Don't forget that." Isabella swallowed, nodding slowly. She needed to hold on to that thought, because soon she'd be stepping into a world that was ready to break her. The grand entrance. When Isabella descended the grand staircase, Leonard was waiting in the entry hall. Dressed in a flawless black tuxedo, he exuded effortless confidence. But as he looked up and saw her, he stopped. His eyes slowly traced over every detail, his usual composure flickering for just a moment. "You look breathtaking." His tone wasn't polite, nor practiced, it was honest. Isabella felt a warmth creep into her cheeks. Looking away, she murmured, "Thank you. You don't look so bad yourself." Leonard chuckled, stepping closer. He extended his arm to her. "Ready?" Isabella took a deep breath, then slipped her hand into his. "As I'll ever be." Together they walked toward the doors, toward a night that would change everything. Leonard extended his arm, and Isabella took it, feeling as though she were stepping into unfamiliar, treacherous waters. The ballroom was nothing short of breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung high above, their golden light illuminating tables adorned with exotic flowers and gilded candelabras. A live orchestra played an elegant melody, the sound weaving through the air like silk. It was a world of wealth, power, and silent judgment. And the moment Isabella and Leonard entered, every head in the room turned. Whispers, stares, amused glances, stifled laughter. Isabella's stomach twisted, but she lifted her chin, forcing herself to remember Leonard's words. He leaned toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're all staring at me." Leonard remained unfazed, his tone calm, steady. "Let them stare. They've got nothing better to do." A faint smile ghosted across Isabella's lips, grateful for his quiet support. The evening began with formal introductions, Leonard guiding her from one polished group to another. Some people were polite but distant, offering cold, practiced smiles. Others were openly condescending, their eyes skimming over her as if she were an unworthy guest at their exclusive table. And then there was Vanessa Belmont. She was impossible to miss. Tall, blonde, stunningly poised. Vanessa moved toward Leonard with the grace of someone who had never been told no. A dazzling smile curved her lips as she placed a delicate hand on his arm, completely ignoring Isabella. "Leonard, darling, it's been too long," she purred. "And who is this distinguished young lady?" Isabella's eyes narrowed slightly. She knew this game, but before she could reply, Leonard stepped in. "Vanessa, this is my wife, Isabella." Vanessa's smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second. She raised a perfectly arched brow, as if processing something absurd, then quickly masked it with a polite handshake. "Of course, a pleasure to meet you, Isabella. The pleasure is all mine," Isabella replied, her tone smooth, unreadable. Vanessa tilted her head, studying her, a slow, calculated assessment. "You know, Isabella, it takes a lot of courage to step into this world. Not everyone can handle it." Isabella smiled sweetly. "Thank you for the advice. I imagine it must be difficult, especially for those who try too hard." For the briefest moment, Vanessa stiffened, her mask cracking ever so slightly. Leonard's lips twitched, suppressing a laugh. She had won that round. Then the music shifted, a waltz, slow and deliberate. Leonard turned to Isabella, extending his hand. "Shall we dance?" She hesitated, glancing around. "I'm not very good at this." His smirk was almost boyish. "Neither am I, but let's pretend we are." And for the first time that night, Isabella let herself forget the audience. She took his hand and stepped onto the dance floor. A dance in the spotlight. Isabella placed her hand in Leonard's, allowing him to guide her onto the ballroom floor. As the music swelled around them, she expected to feel the weight of 100 stares, the silent judgments pressing in. But instead, she felt at ease. Was the rhythm of the waltz, the way Leonard's hand rested firmly at her waist, steady and unwavering? Or maybe, despite everything, she was beginning to realize that standing beside him didn't feel as suffocating as she had feared. "You're doing well," Leonard murmured, leading her in smooth, practiced movements. Isabella smirked. "Maybe that's because you're not stepping on my feet." Leonard chuckled, the sound warm and unguarded. For a moment it felt like they had stepped out of time, as if the world around them had blurred away, leaving only the two of them. Edward's challenge. Later that night, Isabella found a quiet corner at one of the tables, finally allowing herself a moment to breathe. She had done it. She had survived the ball, but her reprieve was short-lived. Edward approached. His smirk was laced with something unpleasant, something just shy of cruel. "So, Isabella," he drawled, swirling the drink in his glass, "how are you enjoying your role as the perfect wife?" Isabella lifted her gaze, unimpressed, and crossed her arms. "Quite well, thank you, Tom." Edward blinked, thrown off by the name mix-up, before laughing. A slow, mocking sound. "I have to admit, you're doing better than I expected. But tell me, how long do you think it will last?" Heat crept up Isabella's spine, but she refused to take the bait. "Edward, what exactly are you trying to prove?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. "Me? Nothing," he said, feigning innocence. "I just find it fascinating how Leonard managed to find someone so unconventional." Before Isabella could respond, Leonard appeared. His hand landed firmly on Edward's shoulder, his expression unreadable but dangerous. "That's enough, Edward." Edward raised his hands in mock surrender, the amusement never leaving his face. "Relax, Leonard, just having a little fun." Leonard didn't move, didn't blink, until Edward took the hint and backed off. Once he was gone, Leonard turned to Isabella. "Sorry about that." Isabella exhaled, shaking her head. "No need to apologize. I can handle people like him." Leonard studied her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering behind his eyes. "I know you can." The ride home. When they finally left the ball, Isabella felt an immediate sense of relief. The car hummed softly as it moved through the city, the blurred lights flickering past the window. She turned to Leonard. "Why did you really bring me here?" Leonard didn't hesitate. "Because I wanted them to see who you are." The quiet sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. She gave a faint smile but didn't respond. For the first time, she felt that Leonard saw her as more than just a pawn in his game. A shift at the mansion. The days following the ball brought a different atmosphere to the Montero mansion. Something had shifted. Leonard and Isabella began to understand each other in ways neither had expected. Conversations grew longer, silences became more comfortable, and moments that should have felt insignificant didn't. But their newfound connection also brought new tensions. Leonard, normally so in control, seemed troubled by something he wouldn't say. And Isabella, for the first time, was starting to care enough to wonder why. A glimpse into the past. Isabella had noticed the change in small, telling ways. The late nights in his office, the distant, distracted look during dinners, the way conversations veered away from personal topics, as if he were deliberately avoiding something. She didn't press, not at first. But one morning, as she entered the library in search of a book, she found him. Leonard sat at the large desk, staring down at a picture frame in his hands. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in the way he held the frame, tight, careful, reluctant. Isabella lingered at the doorway, watching. He hadn't even noticed her. Only when she cleared her throat did he look up, quickly setting the frame down as if he had been caught doing something he shouldn't. "Everything okay?" she asked, noting the way his mask slipped back into place. Leonard exhaled, running a hand over his face. Just memories from the past." But Isabella had already seen the photo. She stepped forward, her curiosity piqued. It was an old image of a couple, a man and a woman standing beside a young boy, who she assumed was Leonard as a child. Their smiles were warm, full of life, but when she looked at Leonard now, holding the picture, the contrast between then and now was stark. "They look happy," she murmured. Leonard let out a slow breath, his fingers tightening around the desk's edge. "They seemed happy." A pause. But the truth is rarely as simple as a photograph. The truth beneath the surface. Isabella slid into the chair across from him. "Want to talk about it?" Leonard hesitated. It wasn't in his nature to share vulnerabilities. To him, emotions were just another form of weakness. But something about Isabella's presence made it feel safe. Safe. "My father was difficult," he admitted, his voice quieter than usual. He believed that success meant complete control, over business, over people, over family. A flicker of bitterness crossed his face, and my mother, she just went along with it, never questioned him, never fought back. Isabella leaned forward slightly. "And you? You grew up in the middle of all that?" Leonard nodded. He expected me to be a copy of him, to carry on his legacy without question. And for a long time, I did. His gaze darkened, as if he were remembering something he wished he could forget. I convinced myself he was right, that the world was a place where only the strongest survive. Isabella studied him, seeing the weight he carried, the part of Leonard Montero that no one else ever saw. "And your mother?" she asked gently. "What did she think?" A shadow passed over Leonard's face. He looked away, jaw tightening. "She always said family came first." A humorless chuckle escaped him. "But in practice, she chose my father and his demands over everything." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Isabella had spent weeks trying to understand him, peeling back the layers of arrogance and control. Now she was finally seeing him. The real him. And he wasn't at all what she had expected. "Maybe that's why you're so reserved," she said softly. Leonard gave a dry laugh. "Reserved is a generous word." His lips twisted slightly. "The truth is, I learned not to trust anyone. It's easier that way." Isabella leaned closer, holding his gaze, her voice unwavering. "But you don't have to live that way, Leonard." A pause. "You can be different." Leonard didn't look away this time. For the first time, he let himself believe that maybe just maybe, she was right. Betrayal unveiled. Leonard held Isabella's gaze, as though trying to make himself believe her words. That he could be different. But before he could respond, the mansion's doorbell echoed through the halls, sharp and insistent. The moment shattered. The chime rang again. Whoever was outside wasn't planning to leave. Leonard and Isabella exchanged a glance before making their way to the entrance, where Santiago was already checking the security monitor. "It's Edward," Santiago announced, his voice laced with concern. Leonard frowned. What does he want now? The door swung open, and Edward strode inside, his usual arrogance unmistakable, but tonight something was different. His posture was more rigid, his eyes burning with something closer to rage. "Leonard, we need to talk." He ignored Isabella completely. Leonard folded his arms. "I'm listening." Edward's gaze flickered toward Isabella, disdainful, irritated. "In private." Leonard didn't hesitate. "Anything you have to say, you can say in front of her." Edward let out a sharp, sarcastic laugh. "Oh, so now she's your confidant? That's interesting, considering what's at stake." Isabella's stomach twisted. "What's going on?" she asked, glancing between them. Leonard's expression hardened. "Say what you came here to say, Edward." Edward reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder, thick, filled with papers, and threw it onto the table. "Here's everything. Proof that your little bet went too far." The words hung in the air, heavy, suffocating. Isabella froze. She turned to Leonard, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. "Bet?" Leonard closed his eyes as if the weight of the moment was crushing him. He had known the truth would come out eventually. But not like this. Not like this. The truth comes crashing down. Edward's voice was laced with cruel satisfaction. "Leonard made a bet with us, Isabella." Her breath caught in her throat. "He said he could marry someone like you, someone completely outside his world, and keep you by his side for 3 months. It was all a game to him." A pause. A final blow. You were just a piece on his chessboard. The silence that followed was devastating. Isabella felt as if the air had been knocked from her lungs. Her mind raced through every conversation, every moment, every touch. Had it all been a lie? Slowly she turned to Leonard, her entire body trembling. She waited for him to deny it, to say Edward was lying, to say this wasn't what it seemed. But he said nothing. Nothing. "Leonard?" she asked, her voice breaking. He opened his mouth, but no words came. "Isabella, But the words died before they could form. She took a step back, as though the ground beneath her had vanished. "So all of this was a lie?" she whispered. "Every word? Every gesture?" Leonard's expression was pained, desperate. "It's not that simple." Isabella let out a shaking breath, her vision blurring. "It never is it? A heart torn apart." Isabella let out a sharp, bitter laugh, a sound empty of joy, full of heartbreak. "Not simple?" she echoed, shaking her head. "You played with my life, Leonard. You used me for some stupid bet." Leonard took a step closer, his expression raw with regret. "Isabella, please, listen to me." "No!" she snapped, stepping away as if his presence itself was unbearable. "I don't want to hear anything else." Her voice wavered, but her fury held steady. "You're exactly the man I thought you were when I first met you. Cold, selfish, and incapable of caring about anyone but yourself." Edward, now thoroughly pleased with the chaos he had orchestrated, gave a smug, condescending smile. "Well, I think my work here is done. Enjoy your evening." And with that, he left, leaving Isabella and Leonard standing in the ruins of everything they had built. The breaking point. Isabella inhaled sharply, trying to steady herself, trying to keep from falling apart. "I can't stay here, Leonard." Her voice was quieter now, but no less certain. "Not after this." Leonard reached for her, desperation breaking through his carefully maintained composure. "Isabella, please!" She shook her head, tears now falling freely. "I know I was wrong," he continued. "But it wasn't just that. I truly care about you." For a moment, just a fraction of a second, something flickered in her expression. Then it was gone. "If you cared," she whispered, voice trembling, "you never would have done this." Leonard opened his mouth, but there were no words, because he knew she was right. Without another glance, Isabella turned and walked away. Leonard stood frozen, watching the one person he never meant to lose slip through his fingers. Walking away. That night, Isabella left the Montero mansion. She refused Leonard's offer to drive her, refused to look back, refused to let herself break until she was far enough away to no longer feel him lingering in her soul. As the ride-share car pulled away, she stared at the distant city lights, searching for an answer, for a way back to herself. Back at the mansion, Leonard sat alone in his study. He stared at the contract. The damn contract that had started it all. For the first time in his life, he realized he had lost something money couldn't buy. 2 worlds apart. In the weeks that followed, Isabella disappeared from his world. She found a small, modest boarding house on the outskirts of the city. The rent was cheap, the rooms small, but it was hers. With part of the money Leonard had given her, she bought herself time to rebuild, to move forward, to figure out who she was without him. But the void left by his betrayal was impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Leonard felt the weight of her absence. The Montero mansion, once a place of quiet elegance, felt emptier than ever. His nights were spent locked in his office, staring at the papers that had cost him the only real thing he had ever had. Santiago noticed the shift in his employer, and one afternoon he finally spoke. "Mr. Montero?" he said hesitantly, stepping into the office. Leonard didn't look up. "I've managed to locate Isabella." Leonard's head lifted sharply, his pulse quickening. He had asked Santiago to find her, but deep down, he hadn't been sure if she would ever let him near her again. "Is she all right?" The words slipped out before he could stop them, his voice softer than he intended. Santiago hesitated before answering. "She's working as a waitress at a cafe downtown." Leonard closed his eyes for a brief second, his jaw tightening. She was starting over, without him. And for the first time, Leonard Montero wasn't sure if he had the right to go after her. A risk worth taking. Leonard sat in silence, processing Santiago's words. Isabella was out there, building a new life. One without him. He had lost her. But if there was even the smallest chance to make things right, he had to take it. Finally, he inhaled sharply and stood. "Get the car ready." An unfinished story. The small cafe was nothing like the high-end restaurants Leonard was used to. It smelled of fresh coffee and baked bread, the air warm with the sound of quiet chatter. It was simple, modest, but for some reason it suited her. Leonard stepped inside, his presence immediately drawing a few curious glances. He barely noticed them. His eyes found Isabella instantly. She was wiping down a table, her movements practiced, routine. She didn't notice him at first, until the bell above the door chimed and his voice broke the silence between them. "Isabella?" She turned, and when she saw him standing there, dressed in a flawless suit, yet looking more hesitant than she had ever seen him, her expression hardened. "Leonard?" Her voice held both surprise and wariness. "What are you doing here?" Leonard took a slow step forward but kept his distance, sensing how fragile the moment was. "I needed to talk to you." She exhaled sharply, turning back to the table. "There's nothing for us to talk about. Please, just 5 minutes," he said, his voice quieter, almost pleading. For a moment, Isabella didn't move. Then, against her better judgment, she nodded. 5 minutes. She motioned to an empty table. Leonard sat while Isabella remained standing, arms crossed. He could feel the wall between them, strong and unyielding. A plea for redemption. Leonard's voice was softer than she had ever heard it. "I know I'm the last person you want to see, and I know what I did was unforgivable." Isabella's expression remained cold. "Then why are you here?" His fingers curled into his palms, but he held her gaze. "Because I realized you deserve so much more than what I gave you, and I want to make things right, if you'll let me." Isabella let out a bitter laugh. "Make things right?" Her arms tightened around herself. "Leonard, you turned my life into a game. You used me to feed your ego. How exactly do you plan to fix that?" Leonard exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I donated the money from the bet. Every penny." Isabella blinked, her expression briefly flickering with surprise. "You did that?" "Yes," he said. "I didn't want any part of it. I know it doesn't erase what happened, but I needed you to know that." She studied him carefully, trying to find deception in his face, but there was none. For the first time, Leonard Montero looked like a man who had nothing left to lose. She was silent, processing his words, the weight of them sinking in. Finally, she spoke. "And what do you want from me now, Leonard?" He leaned forward slightly, his voice steady. "I want a chance to prove I can be different. Not as part of a game, not because of a bet, but because I care about you." Isabella's heart tightened. She wanted to believe him, but the fear of being hurt again lingered, whispering warnings in the back of her mind. Could she risk trusting him again? Leonard, sensing her hesitation, waited. For once, the decision was hers. And for the first time, he wasn't trying to control the outcome. A path to redemption. "I need time," Isabella said, her voice trembling, caught between hope and fear. Leonard nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I'll wait as long as it takes." And for the first time in his life, he meant it. 2 lives, 2 journeys. The weeks that followed brought quiet transformation. Leonard, once a man who measured his worth in power and wealth, found himself stepping into a world he had never truly seen before. He didn't just write checks, he showed up. He visited underserved communities, listening to the struggles of people who had fought battles similar to Isabella's. He shook hands with workers, spoke to single mothers, helped renovate shelters. For the first time, he understood what Isabella had tried to tell him all those months ago. Helping others wasn't about grand gestures, but about showing up, about caring. Meanwhile, Isabella worked hard to rebuild her life. But no matter how many shifts she took at the cafe, no matter how many times she told herself she was moving on, she couldn't stop thinking about Leonard. His words at the cafe lingered, and for the first time she wondered, had he truly changed? An unexpected encounter. One afternoon, while shopping at the market, Isabella turned a corner and nearly bumped into a familiar figure. "Isabella!" She looked up, startled, only to see Victoria, the stylist from the mansion. Before Isabella could react, Victoria pulled her into a warm hug. "Victoria?" Isabella smiled, stepping back. "What are you doing here?" "Oh, I'm visiting a social project in the neighborhood," Victoria said brightly. "Leonard has been coordinating some amazing initiatives here. He's really dedicated." Isabella stilled. "Leonard? Here?" She had known he had the money to fund causes, but she had never imagined him getting personally involved. "Was he here today?" she asked, trying, and failing, to hide her curiosity. Victoria's smile softened. "Yes, and you should see him, Isabella. He's not the same man he used to be." The word settled deep in Isabella's chest. Had he truly changed? Was he still the man who had broken her, or had he become someone else? As she walked home, her mind spun with questions, and for the first time since leaving, she knew what she had to do. Returning to the mansion, the next morning, Isabella stood at the mansion's gates, the place she had once called home. Her pulse raced as she walked through the familiar pathways, a mix of nerves and determination in every step. Then she saw him. Leonard was in the garden, surrounded by a small group of children. Their laughter filled the air as he knelt beside them, listening to their stories, answering their questions. He looked different, more relaxed, more real. The cold, calculated man she had once known was gone. For the first time, she saw Leonard Montero not as the ruthless businessman, but as someone entirely human. Then he turned and froze. For a moment they just stood there, their eyes locked across the distance between them. Then he walked toward her. "Isabella," he said, a hesitant smile playing on his lips. "I wasn't expecting to see you here." She glanced around, taking in the scene. "Victoria told me about the projects you've been doing." Leonard nodded, shoving his hands into his pockets, a nervous gesture she had never seen from him before. "You were the one who inspired me, Isabella," he admitted. "I realized I had never used my power for anything truly meaningful until I met you." She studied him carefully, searching his face, looking for deception but finding none. Leonard Montero, the man she had once despised, once trusted, once loved, had changed. And this time, it wasn't for a bet. Her voice was barely a whisper. You've really changed, haven't you? Leonard held her gaze, his expression open, raw. I hope so, he murmured, but only you can tell me if it's enough. A step toward forgiveness, I'm trying, Leonard said, his voice steady but vulnerable. And I'll do whatever it takes to prove that to you. Isabella took a deep breath, feeling a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying slowly begin to lift. Leonard, I don't know if I can forget what happened, she admitted, but maybe I can forgive you. Leonard's eyes lit up, not with victory, but with something far more genuine. It's all I could ask for. Their conversation in the garden didn't erase the past, but it ignited something between them, a fragile, unspoken hope. They both knew the path forward wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, they were willing to walk it together. Lunch at the mansion. When Leonard invited Isabella to have lunch at the mansion, she hesitated. It felt like stepping back into a world she had once left behind, but in the end, she said yes. A small step, first step. During lunch, the atmosphere was different. Gone was the tension that had once filled their meals. Isabella, who had once sat guarded and distant, now seemed more at ease. And Leonard was different too. No arrogance, no mask, just a man trying to make things right. She broke the silence. I saw the children in the garden, she glanced up at him. You're really involved in these projects, aren't you? Leonard set his napkin beside his plate. Yes. A pause. For the first time, I'm using my money for something meaningful, and I owe that to you. Isabella blinked, surprised. To me? Leonard nodded, his expression soft, sincere. Yes. You made me realize how disconnected I was from reality. Your stories, your strength, they made me question who I was and what I was doing with my life. Isabella's chest tightened. His words felt real, but still, the fear of trusting again lingered. She chose her next words carefully. Leonard, it's not enough to say you've changed. Actions are what truly matter. I know, he replied without hesitation. That's why I'm willing to do whatever it takes to show you that I'm a different man. And for the first time, she started to believe him. Seeing the change in the days that followed, Leonard invited Isabella to visit one of his social projects, a community school being renovated with the funds he had donated. At first, she hesitated. Would this be just another display of wealth, a performance? But curiosity and something deeper led her to accept. When they arrived, Isabella was met with a scene she hadn't expected. Children ran up to Leonard not out of obligation but with genuine warmth. Volunteers greeted him like an old friend, not a distant benefactor. And Leonard, he wasn't just observing, he was listening, engaging. When a teacher approached to discuss the school's needs, Leonard didn't just nod and throw money at the problem. He asked questions. He cared. Isabella stood back, watching. And for the first time, she saw it. Not a man trying to impress her, not a man trying to buy forgiveness, but a man who had finally found something real. You're doing well, Isabella said as Leonard finished his conversation. He turned to her, his smile different than before. Softer, lighter, real. I didn't realize how much this would mean to me, he admitted. I never thought helping others could be so rewarding. Isabella's heart tightened, not with pain, but with something dangerously close to hope. Just maybe, Leonard Montero truly was changing. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready to see where this road would lead. A love worth waiting for. Isabella smiled back, feeling the warmth of something new, yet familiar growing between them. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that Leonard's change wasn't just for show. It was real. But despite their progress, she still needed time. She had spent months trying to move on from the pain, and even though her heart was beginning to trust again, she wasn't ready to rush into anything. She was far too ready to swallow her tragedy. So, one morning over breakfast at the mansion, she made her decision. I need to get back to the cafe. Leonard frowned, disappointment flickering across his face. But he didn't argue. If that's what you need, I understand. Isabella met his gaze, grateful for the way he was giving her space rather than forcing her into a decision. Thank you, she hesitated. But that doesn't mean I don't see what you're doing. I just need a little more time. Leonard nodded, accepting her words with quiet patience. "I'll wait, Isabella, as long as it takes," proving himself without words. As Isabella returned to her routine at the cafe, Leonard continued dedicating himself to his projects. Not for her approval, but because he had finally found something meaningful beyond himself. He spent hours in meetings with nonprofits, community leaders, and volunteers, trying to undo years of selfishness with genuine effort. One afternoon, after a long day at a charity center, Victoria approached him. "We've changed, Leonard," she said with an approving smile. "Isabella would be proud of what you're doing." Leonard gave a modest smile. "I just hope she sees it one day." Victoria placed a supportive hand on his shoulder. "She already does. But trust her timing. Isabella isn't someone who's easily swayed by words alone. You're showing her you're capable of more." Leonard nodded, taking comfort in her words. He wasn't fighting to win her back. He was fighting to become the man worthy of her. A surprise at the cafe. One afternoon, as Isabella was serving customers, she heard the sound of laughter. Small, excited voices filling the cafe. A group of children came running in, and behind them was Leonard, dressed casually. A rare sight. In his hands he carried a bag full of books. Isabella stared at him, caught off guard. "Leonard, what are you doing here?" He grinned, looking uncharacteristically relaxed. "I promised to bring books for the kids, and they insisted on coming with me." He motioned toward the children, who were already eagerly flipping through the books. Giggling and pointing at pictures, Isabella couldn't stop the soft laugh that escaped her lips. "You really have changed, haven't you?" Leonard's smile faded slightly, replaced by something deeper. "I'm trying," he said sincerely, "and I hope you can see that." Isabella held his gaze. For so long she had been afraid to believe him, afraid to open the door to something real again, but now she wasn't so sure that fear should win. The letter? That evening, as Isabella closed the cafe for the night, she noticed an envelope on the counter. Curious, she picked it up, turning it over in her hands before opening it. Inside, a handwritten letter. From Leonard, she took a deep breath and began to read. "Isabella, I know words can't undo what I've done, but I hope they can at least show you how much you've changed my life. But how well I've lived in a hollow world, surrounded by things that never truly meant anything. You showed me that there's more to life than money and power. For that I'll always be grateful. I know that regaining your trust will take time, but I'm willing to wait. Not because it's part of a game or a challenge, but because you're the only person who's ever made me want to be a better man. Affection, Leonard." Tears blurred Isabella's vision as she finished reading. She knew there was still a long road ahead, but for the first time, she felt like she could give him a second chance. A new beginning? The morning sun spilled into the cafe, warming the wooden tables as Isabella moved through her routine. It had been 3 months. 3 months since she had left the Montero mansion. 3 months of rebuilding, healing, and trying to find herself again. And yet, something still felt incomplete. Then, the doorbell rang. Isabella looked up and froze. Leonard stood in the doorway. But this time, he wasn't the powerful, untouchable man she had once known. Dressed simply, with nervousness and hope flickering in his eyes, he looked real. "Leonard?" she breathed. "What are you doing here?" He stepped forward, hesitation clear in every movement. "I needed to see you, Isabella. I had to say something I can't keep inside anymore." She crossed her arms, a protective instinct. "I think we've said everything there was to say, don't you?" Leonard exhaled slowly, but his gaze never left hers. "Maybe," he admitted, "but I couldn't let you walk out of my life without trying again, without telling you how much you changed who I am." Isabella placed the cloth she was holding on the counter, studying him carefully. "And what exactly do you want from me now, Leonard?" Her voice was steady, but her heart was pounding. "Another chance to prove I can win at anything?" Leonard shook his head instantly. "No, I never want to hurt you again, Isabella. I just want you to know that the man you met during that stupid contract is gone. You showed me that life is about so much more than power or money. I'm here because I want to be a man worthy of you." Isabella's breath caught. His words were not just apologies, they were a promise. "Have you really changed, Leonard?" she asked in almost a whisper. He held her gaze, unwavering. "I'm trying, Isabella," he said, his voice full of conviction, "and all I want is a chance to show you, not with words, but with actions." A long silence stretched between them. Then Isabella took a slow step forward, and for the first time she let herself wonder. Maybe some people really could change. A love rewritten. Isabella remained silent, searching his eyes, looking for any trace of deception. But all she found was truth. Finally, she exhaled and said, "Change takes time, Leonard. So does forgiveness." Leonard's lips curled into a small, relieved smile. "I know, and I'm willing to wait as long as it takes." Two worlds coming together. The weeks that followed were filled with quiet, meaningful moments. Leonard took Isabella to visit the social projects he had built, showing her the world he had created, not for status, but for purpose. In return, Isabella invited him into her world. She introduced him to her friends at the cafe, let him see the simplicity of her daily life. And slowly, she realized something. The man standing beside her now was not the same man she had met months ago. A different kind of invitation. One day, Leonard approached her with an invitation. "Come with me," he said, extending his hand. "I want to show you something." Curious, Isabella agreed. They arrived at a charity event in an underserved neighborhood. One of the communities Leonard had been working with, as he spoke to the crowd about the projects being implemented, his eyes found hers. A smile filled with gratitude, warmth, love. After his speech, he walked straight toward her, reaching for her hand. "Come with me." Isabella hesitated, but let him lead her. The Garden of New Beginnings. Leonard led her back to the mansion, to the garden, where so many important conversations had taken place. But tonight, it was different. The space had been transformed. Twinkling lights hung from the trees, casting a soft golden glow over the night. A path of flower petals led to an archway of white and red roses. Beneath it, a small table for two awaited them, a bottle of wine and two glasses perfectly set. Isabella froze. Her breath caught in her throat. "Huh! Leonard, what is this?" He turned to her, his expression unreadable but full of intent. "Something I needed to do." Carefully, he guided her down the path, leading her beneath the arch. And then, he held her hands. A promise from the heart. Leonard's grip was firm, but his voice was soft. "Isabella, you've changed my life in ways I never could have imagined. Before you, I was an empty man, obsessed with control and success. But you showed me what truly matters: people, connections, love." Tears welled in Isabella's eyes, but she didn't stop him. He let him speak his truth. "I know our beginning was wrong," he continued, voice thick with emotion. "And I can't change the past. But what I can do is promise you a better future. If you'll let me." He released her hands for a moment, reaching into his pocket, and when he turned back, he held a small velvet box. Lawley, Leonard Montero knelt before her, for the first time, truly vulnerable. "Isabella," he began, his voice trembling, "I don't want you to be my wife because of a contract or a bet. I want you to be my wife because I love you. I want to build a life with you, one based on respect, trust, and true love. Will you marry me? For real, this time." Isabella covered her mouth with her hands, tears spilling freely. Her heart was torn, between the pain of the past and the hope of the future. But as she looked at Leonard, this man who had broken her, who had fought to redeem himself, she saw sincerity, she saw regret, she saw love. And for the first time in forever, she wasn't afraid. "Yes, Leonard," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I accept." A love that was never supposed to exist. Yet somehow, it became everything. A future rebuilt. Leonard's face lit up with pure, unrestrained joy as he slipped the ring onto Isabella's finger. For so long he had feared losing her forever. Now she was his, not because of a contract, not because of a bet, but because she chose him. Leonard stood, pulling her into a tight, unwavering embrace. They remained there, under the twinkling lights and the floral arch, as if the world beyond them had ceased to exist. For the first time in their complicated, messy, beautiful story, everything felt right. A wedding in the Garden of New Beginnings. 2 months later, in the very same garden where their story had been rewritten, Isabella and Leonard stood beneath a breathtaking canopy of fresh flowers and flickering candles. The setting was magical, not because of its extravagance, but because of what it meant. This time, it was real. This time, it was forever. The walk toward forever. Isabella wore a white gown adorned with delicate embroidery, her hair styled in an elegant bun with small white flowers woven through it. She walked down the aisle slowly, steadily, every step carrying the promise of a new beginning. At the altar, Leonard waited. Dressed in a classic black suit, his hands clasped together, his heart pounding with a depth of emotion he had never known before. When he saw her, the woman who had changed him, saved him, forgiven him, his eyes shone with unshed tears. She was his light, his love, his everything. Vows from the heart. Before their friends, their loved ones, and the people who had become part of their journey, they spoke the words that would bind them together. Leonard held Isabella's hands, his touch firm, steady. "Isabella, you are the best thing that has ever happened to me. I promise to love you, respect you, and stand by your side through every moment, good or bad. Thank you for giving me the chance to become a better man." Isabella's eyes shimmered with tears. She had once thought she could never trust him again, but now she knew. She had made the right choice. Her voice trembled, but her words were unwavering. "Leonard, you've shown me that people can change, and that true love requires courage. I promise to walk by your side always as we build our life together." Happily ever after, their way. The officiant smiled. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." A pause. "You may kiss the bride." Leonard didn't hesitate. He pulled Isabella close and kissed her with every ounce of love, devotion, and promise he had. The crowd erupted into cheers, petals flying into the air, laughter and applause surrounding them. They had overcome the past, and now they were stepping into the future. Together. A night of celebration. The reception was filled with music, laughter, and endless dancing. Leonard and Isabella, hand in hand, never straying too far from one another, soaked in every moment. There had been a time when they thought they would never reach this place. A time when they had nearly let go. But now, they knew. Love wasn't about how you started, it was about how you chose to move forward. And as they danced beneath the stars, Leonard leaned down and whispered, "Forever?" Isabella smiled up at him, squeezing his hand. Forever. The end. Or rather, the beginning. What do you think? Did Isabella make the right choice by forgiving and marrying Leonard? Share your opinion in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What's your score? Let us know. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another emotional story. Want more heartfelt tales? Click on the end screen now and dive into more unforgettable story.